The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the ramshackle trading post, and Nora Kimball pressed her handkerchief against her mouth to muffle another rattling cough that tore through her chest like wildfire. Through the dusty window, she could see him waiting, the mountain man who had paid good money for a bride, advertised as healthy and young, and her heart sank with the weight of her deception. The year was 1889, and Nome, Alaska, had drawn prospectors and desperate souls alike to its harsh shores, though Nora had come for different reasons entirely, clutching a newspaper clipping that promised a fresh start if only she could hide the consumption eating away at her lungs in the 34 years that lined her face beneath carefully applied powder. She descended the coach steps carefully, gripping the rail as another wave of weakness swept through her. The cold Alaskan air bit at her cheeks, so different from the mild climate of Oregon, where she had spent the last 3 years in a sanatorium, draining what little savings she had inherited from her parents. The advertisement had been her last hope, placed by a man named Yates Donnelly, who sought a wife to share his life in the wilderness beyond Nome. She had responded with a carefully worded letter and a photograph taken 10 years prior, when her cheeks still held color and her eyes still sparkled with health. Yates Donnelly stood a head taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to carry the weight of mountains themselves. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face bore the weathered lines of a man who had spent years battling the elements. Muscle rippled beneath his worn flannel shirt as he moved forward, and Nora felt a sharp pang of guilt. This man deserved better than the broken woman who stood before him now. "Miss Kimball?" His voice was deep, resonant, carrying easily over the wind that whipped through the street. "Mr. Donnelly." She managed a smile, fighting the urge to cough again. "I apologize for my appearance. The journey was quite taxing." His blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied her face for a long moment. She watched the realization dawn slowly, saw the way his jaw tightened as he took in the hollows of her cheeks, the tremor in her hands, the way she held herself as though each breath required conscious effort. He knew. Of course he knew. She had been foolish to think she could hide it even for a moment. "Your trunk?" he asked finally, his tone unreadable. "Just the one." She pointed to the small leather case being unloaded from the coach. Everything she owned in the world fit into that single trunk. There had been a time when she traveled with 3 large cases and a hat box, when she had been the daughter of a prosperous merchant with prospects for a good marriage. But consumption had stolen all of that, along with her fiancé, her friends, and eventually her family's fortune as they spent everything trying to save her. Yates lifted the trunk as though it weighed nothing, slinging it over one massive shoulder. "My cabin is 2 hours north. We should leave while there's still good light." "Of course." Nora pulled her wool coat tighter around her thin frame. "Mr. Donnelly, I must speak with you about certain matters that require clarification." "Later." He gestured toward a sturdy-looking horse and a smaller mare tied nearby. "Can you ride, or do you need to sit in front of me?" The thought of sitting pressed against that broad chest, of having him feel how her body shook with each labored breath, mortified her. "I can ride." He helped her onto the smaller mare with surprising gentleness, his large hand steadying her waist as she settled into the saddle. Even through her layers of clothing, she could feel the warmth and strength of him. When was the last time anyone had touched her with such care? The doctors had been clinical, and her nurses had kept their distance, fearful of contagion. They rode in silence through Nome, past the saloons and supply stores that catered to miners and trappers. The town had sprung up almost overnight when gold was discovered in the region, though Yates' letter had mentioned he had been in Alaska long before the rush began. He had come north after the war, he had written, seeking solitude and a life away from the crowded cities of the lower states. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up into a vast wilderness of snow-covered tundra and distant mountains that pierced the gray sky like jagged teeth. The beauty of it stole Nora's breath, though whether from wonder or the thin cold air, she could not say. She had grown up in green valleys and rolling hills, had spent her youth among cultivated gardens and manicured lawns. This raw, untamed land was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The cold seeped through her coat, and despite her best efforts, she began to shiver. Yates noticed immediately, drawing his horse closer to hers. "How long?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. I beg your pardon? How long have you been sick? Nora's throat tightened. There was no point in lying now. 3 years. Though I have been told it has been in my lungs longer than that. Consumption. Yes? He was silent for several minutes, and Nora braced herself for the anger, the recriminations, perhaps even abandonment in this frozen wilderness. She would not blame him. She had deceived him, had traveled all this way under false pretenses. But she had been so desperate, so tired of being alone and afraid. And your age? He asked finally. 34. The admission cost her. The photograph I sent was taken many years ago. I'm sorry. I should have been honest from the beginning. Why were you not? Because I was dying alone in a charity ward, and your advertisement spoke of needing someone to share your life, someone who would appreciate the quiet and the solitude, someone who would not demand parties and society. Her voice cracked, and she pressed on before she lost her courage. I thought perhaps I could give you what you needed, even if only for whatever time I have left. I have saved a small amount of money. It is yours for your trouble in bringing me here. I will return to Nome in the morning and find work until I can afford passage back to Oregon. What work? His tone was flat, matter of fact. You can barely sit a horse. I can sew. I can read and write. Surely someone needs a clerk or a seamstress. Nome is not a place for dying women alone. He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. In the fading light, his features seemed carved from granite, all hard planes and sharp angles. I placed that advertisement because I wanted a wife, not a housekeeper or a temporary companion. I want someone to build a life with. Then you should have that. Tears burned hot against the cold air. You should have someone healthy and young, someone who can give you children and grow old beside you. I cannot give you any of those things, Mr. Donnelly. I am sorry I wasted your time. He studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. Can you cook? The question caught her off guard. Yes, though I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. Can you tend a fire, mend clothing, keep a cabin clean? I can do all of those things, though perhaps not as quickly as I once did. Do you drink? Gamble? Have a sharp tongue that will fill my days with nagging? No, none of those things. Then you will do. Nora stared at him, certain she had misheard. I do not understand. Yates turned his horse back to the trail and started forward again. You are here. I am here. We both need something the other can provide. The preacher will come through in 3 weeks for his circuit. We will marry then. But I am dying. The words burst from her, sharp with frustration and confusion. Everyone is dying, Miss Kimball. Some just do it slower than others. He glanced back at her. I have lived alone in these mountains for 15 years. I have had my fill of solitude. What I want now is someone to talk to in the evenings, someone whose face I can look upon that is not my own reflection in the water. If that someone can only give me a few months or a year, then I will take what I can get. That is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. But even as she said it, something warm unfurled in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Perhaps. He shrugged those massive shoulders. But it is my choice to make, and I have made it. If you wish to return to Nome tomorrow, I will take you. But if you stay, you will be my wife, and I will care for you as a husband should. That is my offer. Nora urged her mare forward, trying to process his words. She had expected anger, disgust, rejection. Instead, this strange mountain man had simply accepted her as she was and decided she would do. It defied all logic, all social convention. And yet, as she watched him ride ahead of her, straight-backed and confident in his saddle, she found herself wanting to accept with an intensity that frightened her. Why? She called after him. Why would you do this? He did not turn around, but his voice carried clearly in the cold air. Because I have seen men die on battlefields and in mining accidents and from diseases that rotted them from the inside out, and the ones who died easiest were those who had someone holding their hand, someone who loved them. I would not wish a lonely death on anyone, Miss Kimball. Not even a stranger who lied about her age and health. The simple humanity of his words broke something inside her, and Nora found tears streaming down her face as they rode on through the gathering darkness. She had spent 3 years being treated as a pariah, a source of contagion to be avoided. Her friends had stopped visiting. Her fiancé had broken their engagement within a month of her diagnosis. Even her own family had seemed relieved when she agreed to move to the sanatorium, putting distance between her illness and their respectable life. But this man, this stranger, had looked at her with clear eyes and seen all her flaws, all her deceptions, and had chosen to accept her anyway. It was more than she had dared hope for, more than she felt she deserved. They rode for another hour before Yates's cabin came into view. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, a sturdy structure built from thick logs with smoke curling from a stone chimney. A creek ran nearby, its surface frozen but visible where the ice had cracked. As they drew closer, Nora could see that the cabin was larger than she had expected, with real glass windows and a covered porch that ran the length of the front. "This is beautiful," she said softly as Yates helped her down from the mare. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and his hands tightened on her waist, steadying her. "Can you walk?" "Yes, I just need a moment." But even as she said it, another cough seized her, violent and racking. She tasted blood on her tongue and quickly pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, trying to hide the crimson stains that appeared on the white fabric. Without a word, Yates swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Nora gasped in surprise, instinctively clutching at his shoulders. Through his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle of his arms, the steady rhythm of his heart. He carried her up the porch steps and shouldered open the door, bringing her into the warmth of the cabin. The interior was simple but well maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire already banked in the hearth. A table and chairs sat near the kitchen area, and she could see a doorway that likely led to a bedroom. Furs and woven blankets added warmth to the space, and shelves lined with books surprised her. Somehow she had not expected a mountain man to be a reader. Yates carried her to a chair near the fireplace and set her down gently before moving to stoke the fire. Flames leaped higher, casting dancing shadows across his face. Nora watched him work, noting the efficient economy of his movements, the way he seemed completely at home in this wilderness cabin. He filled a kettle with water from a barrel near the door and hung it over the fire. "You should rest," he said, not looking at her. "I will bring in your trunk and see to the horses. When I return, we will have tea and supper. Mr. Donnelly." She waited until he turned to face her. "Thank you." He nodded once, a short jerk of his head, and then he was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet warmth of the cabin. Nora leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her in waves. The journey had taken everything she had, and she knew she would pay for it in the coming days with increased pain and weakness. But for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel the crushing weight of despair that had become her constant companion. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Yates was gently shaking her shoulder. "Miss Kimball, you need to drink this." He pressed a cup of tea into her hands and she sipped it gratefully, tasting the hint of honey and something else, some herb she could not identify. The warmth spread through her chest, easing the tightness that made every breath a struggle. "What is in this?" she asked. "Pine needle tea with honey and a bit of willow bark. The native people taught me to make it. It helps with inflammation." He moved to the table where a simple meal was laid out. "Can you eat?" Nora rose carefully and made her way to the table. There was fresh bread, likely purchased in Nome, along with dried meat, cheese, and canned vegetables. It was more food than she had seen in one place for some time, and her stomach growled despite her general lack of appetite. They ate in silence, though Nora found herself stealing glances at the man across from her. Yates Donnelly was perhaps 40 years old, she guessed, with the kind of rugged appearance that came from years of hard living. His hands were scarred and calloused, but he handled the dishes with surprising delicacy. She wondered what his story was, what had driven him to seek solitude in the Alaskan wilderness, what made him willing to marry a dying woman he had never met. "Tell me about yourself," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Your letter mentioned you came here after the war." "Which war?" "The Civil War. I fought for the Union." His jaw tightened. "When it ended, I found I could not stomach the sight of cities and crowds anymore. Too many ghosts. I went west first, tried prospecting in Colorado for a time, but there were too many people even there. A trapper told me about Alaska, said it was a place where a man could lose himself in the wilderness and never see another soul if he chose. So I came north in 1874. "And you have been here ever since?" Mostly. I go to Nome a few times a year for supplies, sometimes guide hunting parties if I need extra money. But yes, this has been home for 15 years now. It must have been terribly lonely. He shrugged. Loneliness was what I wanted, or so I thought. But lately, I have found myself talking to the trees and the animals like they were old friends. Figured that was a sign it was time for human company again. So you placed an advertisement for a bride. Nora sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of the cup. Did you receive many responses? A dozen or so. Most wanted to know how much gold I had found, or how soon we could move to a proper city. One asked if I had all my teeth. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Your letter was different. You wrote about the books you had read, the sunsets you had watched from your window, the way you missed the sound of rain on a roof. You sounded like someone who understood the value of quiet moments. Guilt twisted in her stomach. I wrote those things because I thought they were what you wanted to hear. Were they true? Yes, but that does not excuse my deception about everything else. Yates leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over that broad chest. Miss Kimball, I am a simple man. I do not have much use for pretense or social games. You are here, I am here, and we have both been honest about who we are now. That is all that matters to me. The question is whether you want to stay. Nora set down her cup carefully, her hands trembling slightly. I want to stay, she said softly, but I need you to understand what that means. I'm not going to get better. This sickness will only worsen. There will be days when I cannot leave the bed, when every breath is agony. There will be blood and pain, and eventually death. Are you truly prepared to witness all of that? I have witnessed worse, he said quietly, and I would rather witness it while making your remaining time as comfortable as possible than have you die alone in some charity ward where no one knows your name. The tears came again, hot and unstoppable. Nora pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She felt Yates rise from his chair, heard his heavy footsteps crossing the floor. Then his hand was on her shoulder, warm and solid, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. I am sorry, she managed between sobs. I have not cried like this in so long. Crying is not weakness. His voice was gentle, at odds with his rough appearance. Let it out. You're safe here. Safe. When was the last time she had felt truly safe? Nora leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steadiness. Gradually, the tears subsided, leaving her drained but somehow lighter, as though she had released a burden she had been carrying for too long. I should show you the bedroom, Yates said, stepping back. You need proper rest. He led her through the doorway she had noticed earlier. The bedroom was modest but comfortable, with a large bed covered in thick furs and blankets, a dresser, and a washstand. A smaller fireplace connected to the main chimney, providing additional warmth. This is your room, he said. I will sleep in the main room. You are giving me your bed? Nora stared at him in surprise. You are ill and exhausted from your journey. You need the better bed. He moved to the dresser and pulled out a worn but clean nightgown. This belonged to the woman who ran the trading post before she moved back to Seattle. She left several items behind. They should fit you well enough. Nora took the nightgown, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. Where will you sleep? I have a bedroll and plenty of furs. I will be comfortable enough by the fire. He moved toward the door, then paused. If you need anything in the night, call out. I'm a light sleeper. After he left, Nora changed into the nightgown with trembling fingers. The fabric was soft against her skin, worn smooth by many washings. She climbed into the bed and pulled the furs up to her chin, marveling at the warmth and softness. It had been so long since she had slept in a real bed, in a room that felt like home rather than a hospital. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of Yates moving around in the main room, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind through the pines outside. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind raced with questions and uncertainties. She had come to Alaska expecting rejection, perhaps even death in some anonymous boarding house. Instead, she had found something she had not dared hope for: acceptance, kindness, and the promise of companionship in her final days. Tomorrow, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, tomorrow she would begin to repay Yates Donnelly's kindness in whatever small ways she could manage. She might be dying, but she was not dead yet, and she would not waste whatever time remained to her. Morning light filtering through the window woke Nora, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, along with the familiar tightness in her chest and the ache in her bones. She sat up slowly, assessing her condition. The journey had taken its toll, as expected, but the night's rest had helped. She felt weak but functional, which was the best she could hope for. She dressed in one of her simple day dresses and made her way to the main room. Yates was nowhere to be seen, but the fire was blazing and a pot of porridge bubbled gently on the hook. A note lay on the table in cramped handwriting. Gone to check traps. Back by midday. Help yourself to breakfast. Nora ladled porridge into a bowl and ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the surprisingly good flavor. Yates had added dried berries and a touch of maple syrup, turning the simple meal into something almost luxurious. As she ate, she studied the cabin more carefully in the morning light. Everything was neat and well organized, speaking to the disciplined nature of the man who lived here. The books on the shelves ranged from practical volumes on survival and animal tracking to classic literature and poetry. She spotted Shakespeare, Whitman, and several volumes of natural history. It painted a picture of a man far more complex than his rough exterior suggested. After breakfast, Nora washed the dishes and explored the cabin more thoroughly. She found yarn and knitting needles in a basket, fabric scraps that could be turned into quilts, and a sewing kit that needed organizing. Her fingers itched to create something, to be useful. For too long, she had been an invalid, a burden, someone who required care rather than someone who could give it. Here, perhaps, she could be more than her illness. She settled near the fire with the sewing kit and began sorting through the jumbled contents, organizing needles by size and color matching thread spools. It was simple work, but it felt good to be doing something productive. Her fingers moved slowly, hampered by the weakness that plagued her, but she persisted. She was so absorbed in her task that she did not hear the door open. When Yates spoke, she started in surprise. "You should be resting," he said, though his tone held no criticism. "I rested all night. I needed to do something useful." She held up the organized sewing kit. "Your supplies were in disarray." He hung his coat on a peg by the door and moved to the fire, warming his hands. "I'm not much for sewing. I appreciate the organization. Did you have success with your traps?" 3 rabbits and a fox. The rabbits will make for good eating. The fox pelt will bring money in Nome if I cure it properly." He glanced at her. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but no worse than usual." She set the sewing kit aside. "Mr. Donnelly, I have been thinking about our arrangement. If we are to be married, I should know more about you, and you should know more about me beyond my illness and my age." He nodded slowly and settled into the chair across from her. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Where you were born, what your family was like, why you joined the army, what you did in the war. I want to know the man I'm going to marry, not just the mountain man who lives in the wilderness." For a long moment she thought he would refuse. His jaw worked as though he were chewing on the words, deciding whether to swallow them or spit them out. Finally, he spoke. "I was born in Ohio in 1847. My father was a farmer, my mother a schoolteacher. I had 2 brothers and a sister. When the war came, my father and older brother enlisted immediately. I was only 14, too young to go with them. My father died at Antietam. My brother made it through the war but never really came home. He would wake screaming in the night, would sometimes not recognize us for hours at a time. He hanged himself in the barn in 1866. Nora's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry. I enlisted as soon as I turned 16, lied about my age to get in, thought I would avenge my father, make him proud. Instead, I learned that war is just organized butchery, and that glory is a lie we tell ourselves to justify the killing." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I saw things, did things that still wake me in the night sometimes. When the war ended, I could not go back to the farm, could not pretend that everything was normal. My mother begged me to stay, but I had to leave. I have not seen her or my surviving siblings in over 20 years. Do they know you are alive? I write occasionally, short letters telling them I am well. My sister writes back. My mother has not responded in 10 years. I think she cannot forgive me for leaving." Nora reached out and touched his hand, and after a moment he unclenched his fist and let her fingers curl around his. His hand dwarfed hers, rough and scarred, but the warmth of it was comforting. My story is less dramatic, but no less sad in its own way, she said quietly. I was born in Oregon in 1855. My father owned a general store in Portland, and we lived comfortably. I had everything a young woman could want: nice dresses, schooling, friends, prospects for a good marriage. I was engaged to a banker's son named Frederick. We were to be married in the spring of 1886. What happened? I fell ill that winter. At first, I thought it was just a cold that would not clear, but it grew worse, and the doctor diagnosed consumption. Frederick broke our engagement within a month. He said he could not risk his health or his family's future by marrying an invalid. Most of my friends stopped calling. People crossed the street to avoid me. The old pain welled up sharp as ever. My parents spent everything trying to cure me. They took me to specialists in San Francisco, sent me to sanatoriums in the mountains. Nothing helped. My father died of a heart attack in 1887, and I know the stress of my illness and the financial burden contributed to it. My mother lasted another year before pneumonia took her. I have been alone since then, living on what little money remained from the sale of their property. The man who left you is a fool, Yates said flatly. If he could not see past your illness to the woman you are, then he did not deserve you. Most people would say he was being practical. Most people are cowards who would rather protect themselves than stand by someone who needs them. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I am not most people, Nora. May I call you Nora? Yes, and I will call you Yates if I may. You may. He studied their joined hands for a moment. I meant what I said yesterday. I want you to stay. I want you to be my wife. Not out of pity, but because I think we could be good for each other, for whatever time we have. I want that too, Nora said softly. More than I can say. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, the fire crackling softly between them, and Nora felt something shift inside her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something precious, the possibility of connection, of being known and accepted despite all her flaws and failures. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Yates would rise early to check his traps and hunt, while Nora would wake later and prepare breakfast. She found herself growing stronger in small ways, whether from the pine needle tea Yates brewed for her each morning or simply from having purpose again. She mended his clothes, organized the cabin, and began preparing meals that were more elaborate than the simple fare he had been living on. Yates, in turn, showed her the wilderness around the cabin. On days when she felt well enough, he would take her on short walks, teaching her the names of plants and animals, showing her how to read the signs of weather in the sky and the behavior of birds. He treated her with a gentle patience that seemed at odds with his rough exterior, never pushing her beyond her limits, but always encouraging her to try. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Nora stood at the window watching snow fall in thick, fat flakes. Yates came up behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Beautiful, is it not? He said. Yes, I have never seen snow like this. In Portland, we would get a dusting occasionally, but nothing like this. Alaska snow is different. Heavier, wetter. Good for packing and building. He paused. The preacher will be here tomorrow. Nora's breath caught. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would become Yates Donnelly's wife. The thought filled her with equal parts excitement and trepidation. Are you certain about this? I have never been more certain of anything. He turned her gently to face him, his large hands resting on her shoulders. But I need to know that you are certain as well. If you have any doubts, speak them now. She looked up into his face, at the blue eyes that had grown so familiar, at the strong jaw and the gentle curve of his mouth. In the past 2 weeks, she had come to know this man in ways she had never known Frederick, her former fiancé. She knew that Yates woke before dawn and lay awake some nights plagued by old nightmares. She knew he had a dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments. She knew he was endlessly patient with her limitations and that he read poetry by firelight when he thought she was asleep. I have no doubts, she said firmly. I want to marry you, Yates Donnelly. I want to be your wife for whatever time I have left. Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and tender that made her heart skip. He lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. Then tomorrow we will marry, and you will be Nora Donnelly. and I will count myself the luckiest man in Alaska." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Nora did not want to pull away. She tilted her face up to meet him, and his lips touched hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It was nothing like the perfunctory kisses Frederick had given her, all duty and no passion. This was something else entirely, tender and searching, a promise and a question all at once. When they broke apart, Nora found herself breathless for reasons that had nothing to do with her illness. Yates rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I will do my best to be a good husband to you," he said quietly. "I know I am rough around the edges, that I have lived alone too long and forgotten some of the niceties of civilized behavior. But I will try, Nora. I will try to give you happiness." "You already have," she whispered. "You gave it to me the moment you chose to accept me as I am." That night, Nora lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside and thought about the strange turns life could take. A month ago, she had been preparing for death in a charity ward, surrounded by strangers who looked through her rather than at her. Now she was in a cabin in the Alaskan wilderness, about to marry a mountain man who read poetry and brewed healing teas and kissed her like she was something precious rather than something broken. The preacher arrived the next morning, riding a sturdy mule and wrapped in so many furs he looked like a bear. Reverend Thomas was a circuit preacher who traveled between the scattered settlements and homesteads, bringing religion and news to the isolated communities. He was a jovial man in his 50s with a full beard and kind eyes. "Mr. Donnelly, I received your message. So you are finally taking a wife." He dismounted and shook Yates's hand vigorously. "I never thought I would see the day." "Neither did I," Yates admitted. "Reverend Thomas, this is Nora Kimball. She arrived from Oregon 2 weeks ago." "Miss Kimball, a pleasure." The Reverend took her hand gently, and she saw his eyes take in her thin frame and pale complexion with the practiced assessment of someone who had presided over many sickbeds. But he said nothing about her obvious ill health, only smiled warmly. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony?" They gathered before the fireplace, with Reverend Thomas standing with his back to the flames. Yates and Nora stood facing him, and Nora felt her heart hammering in her chest. She had worn her best dress, a simple green wool that had belonged to her mother, and had pinned up her hair with the silver combs that were the last of her jewelry. Yates had trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt, and she thought he looked almost unbearably handsome. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Reverend Thomas began, "a covenant between two souls who choose to walk through life together. It is not always easy, this choosing to bind yourself to another. There will be trials and hardships, joys and sorrows. But if you face them together, with honesty and compassion, then your union will be a source of strength." He spoke of love and commitment, of partnership and mutual support. Nora found herself hanging on every word, her eyes locked with Yates's. She saw her own hopes and fears reflected in his gaze, and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding that this moment was changing them both irrevocably. "Yates Donnelly, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. "Nora Kimball, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Her voice trembled slightly, but the words were clear. "Have you rings to exchange?" Yates produced 2 simple gold bands, and Nora's eyes widened in surprise. "I made them from nuggets I have found over the years," he said quietly. "I wanted you to have something that came from this land, something made by my own hands." Tears blurred her vision as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, warm and solid against her skin. She took the other ring and slipped it onto his finger, marveling at how small it looked on his large hand. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Yates pulled her close, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. His kiss was deeper this time, full of promise and restrained passion, and Nora melted into it, her hands clutching at his broad shoulders. When they broke apart, she was breathless and blushing, and Reverend Thomas was beaming. "Congratulations to you both. May God bless your union." They shared a simple meal with the Reverend, who regaled them with stories from his circuit. He spoke of births and deaths, weddings and funerals, the small dramas that played out in the scattered communities. Nora found herself laughing at his tales, feeling lighter than she had in years. After the Reverend left, promising to return in the spring, Nora and Yates stood together on the porch watching him disappear into the trees. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, and the world seemed hushed and waiting. "So," Yates said, his arm around her shoulders, "you are Nora Donnelly now." "I am." She leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural it felt. "Are you already regretting your decision?" "Not even a little." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Come inside. It is too cold for you out here." That night, Yates carried her trunk into the main bedroom, and Nora understood what he was telling her without words. This would be their room now, their shared space. He was as nervous as she was, she realized with some surprise, this big mountain man who faced down bears and winter storms without flinching. They undressed in the firelight, both of them shy and uncertain. When Yates saw the full extent of her thinness, the way her ribs showed beneath her skin and her collarbones jutted out sharply, his jaw tightened. But he said nothing, only drew her close and held her against his chest. "You are beautiful," he said fiercely. "Do not ever think otherwise." They made love slowly, carefully, Yates taking infinite pains not to hurt her. He was so gentle it made her want to cry, this man who could snap a branch with his bare hands, treating her like spun glass. And when it was over, he held her close, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me this. For giving me a wedding night when I thought I would never have one, for making me feel like a woman instead of an invalid." His arms tightened around her. "You are my wife, Nora, my partner, not an invalid, not a burden. Do you understand?" "I'm trying to." "Good. Because I will keep telling you until you believe it." She fell asleep wrapped in his warmth, feeling safer and more content than she had in her entire life. The weeks that followed were the happiest Nora had ever known. She and Yates settled into married life with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits. She discovered that he liked his coffee strong and bitter, that he hummed old war songs while working, and that he had a habit of bringing her small gifts from his trips into the woods, a perfectly shaped pine cone, a bright feather, an unusually colored stone. In turn, Yates learned that Nora was sharp-witted and quick with words, that she loved to read aloud by the fire, and that she had a talent for cooking that transformed their simple meals into something special. He learned the signs of when she was having a bad day, when the pain in her chest grew too great, and each breath became a battle. On those days, he would brew his special tea and sit beside her, reading poetry or simply holding her hand until the worst passed. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Nora told him about her childhood in Portland, about the father who had taught her to read and the mother who had taught her to sew. She told him about the books she loved and the places she had dreamed of seeing. Yates spoke of the war more openly now, sharing memories he had kept locked away for years. He told her about the men he had served with, the battles he had survived, the reasons he sometimes woke in the night, shaking and afraid. "I used to think the nightmares would drive me mad," he admitted one night as they lay in bed. "But they are easier now with you beside me. When I wake afraid, I can hear you breathing, feel your warmth, and I know I am not back in that terrible place." "Do you regret fighting?" Nora asked. "No. The cause was just, even if the methods were brutal. Slavery is an evil that had to be ended. But I regret the cost. I regret what it did to all of us who survived." He turned to face her in the darkness. "That is why I wanted a life here, away from civilization. I needed simplicity, needed to rebuild myself in a place where the only battles were against the elements. And now? Now I find I want something more than just survival. I want to live, Nora. I want to build a life with you, make memories that are good instead of terrible. Is that foolish?" "No," she said softly. "It is human. We all want to leave something behind, some proof that we existed and mattered." As winter deepened, Nora found herself growing weaker. The cold was hard on her lungs, and there were days when she could not leave the bed at all. Yates tended to her with patient care, helping her eat when she was too weak to hold a spoon, changing her nightgown when sweat soaked through it, emptying the basin when she coughed up blood. Never once did he complain or show disgust. He simply did what needed to be done with the same steady competence he brought to everything. On one particularly bad night, when Nora was certain she would not see morning, she clutched Yates's hand and whispered, "I am sorry. I'm sorry you are seeing me like this." "Hush," he said, wiping her fevered brow with a cool cloth. "You have nothing to apologize for. I am dying, and I am making you watch. That is cruel. Nora, look at me." He waited until her eyes focused on his face. "I knew what I was agreeing to when I asked you to marry me. I chose this. I chose you, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Do you understand? These months with you have been worth more than all the years I spent alone." "How can you say that?" Tears streamed down her face. "All I have brought you is pain and work." "You have brought me joy," he said fiercely. "You have brought me laughter and conversation and companionship. You have made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. You have given me a reason to look forward to each day instead of simply enduring it. That is not nothing, Nora. That is everything." His words broke through her despair, and she clung to him, sobbing against his chest. He held her through the long night, and when dawn came, she was still breathing, still fighting. The human will to survive was a powerful thing, she realized, especially when you had something worth surviving for. But Yates was right to be concerned. As winter wore on, Nora's condition deteriorated. She coughed up blood more frequently, and her weight continued to drop despite Yates's best efforts to get her to eat. There were moments of clarity and relative health, days when she could sit by the fire and knit or read, but they grew fewer as the weeks passed. One afternoon in early March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the lengthening days, Nora looked up from the sock she was mending to find Yates watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. "I love you," he said simply. "I should have said it before now, but I was afraid it would make losing you harder. But I realized I was being a coward. You deserve to know that you are loved, Nora. You deserve to hear those words every day." The sock fell from her nerveless fingers. "You love me?" "With everything I have." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I love your sharp mind and your gentle heart. I love the way you hum while you cook and the way you argue with the characters in books. I love your courage in facing what you are facing, and I love the way you have made me feel alive again. I love you, Nora Donnelly, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "Oh, Yates." She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the scratch of his beard against her palms. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you looked at me on that first day and chose to accept me despite my lies. You have given me the most precious gift. You made me feel worthy of love again. I had forgotten what that felt like." He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Nora tasted the salt of her own tears on his lips. When they broke apart, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, and they made love with a desperation born of knowing their time was limited, that each touch might be their last. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the firelight, Yates traced gentle patterns on her skin and said, "I want you to fight, Nora. I want you to fight for every day, every hour, every moment. Fight for me. Fight for us." "I will," she promised. "I will fight as long as I can." Spring came to Alaska in a rush of melting snow and budding trees. The world transformed from white to green seemingly overnight, and Nora sat by the window watching the change with wonder. She had not expected to see another spring, had not dared hope she would live to see the flowers bloom. But here she was, still breathing, still living, and the miracle of it was not lost on her. Yates took her outside on warm days, bundling her in blankets and carrying her to a chair on the porch where she could feel the sun on her face and breathe in the scent of new growth. The fresh air seemed to help, and she found herself having more good days than bad. She began to hope, dangerous as that hope was, that perhaps she might have more time than the doctors had predicted. "The creek is running high," Yates said one morning as he helped her dress. "The salmon will be running soon. I will need to set up the smokehouse and prepare for the catch." "Teach me," Nora said impulsively. "Teach me how to smoke fish. I want to learn." He looked at her with surprise and then pleasure. Are you certain? It is hard work. I'm stronger now. The warm weather agrees with me. And besides, I want to be useful. I want to contribute more than just mending and cooking. So Yates taught her the art of smoking salmon, showing her how to prepare the fish, how to build the smoking racks, how to maintain the proper temperature in the smokehouse. Nora worked slowly, frequently needing to rest, but she persisted. There was something deeply satisfying about learning a new skill, about feeling capable and productive. As summer progressed, Nora continued to confound expectations. She gained a little weight, her cough eased somewhat, and she found she could walk short distances without becoming completely winded. Yates watched this transformation with cautious hope, not wanting to believe she might be getting better, but unable to deny the evidence before his eyes. Perhaps the climate agrees with you, he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Or perhaps it is the pine needle tea. Or perhaps it is simply that you have a reason to keep fighting. Perhaps it is all of those things, Nora said, leaning against his shoulder. Or perhaps it is simply that love is the best medicine of all. They sat in comfortable silence, and Nora thought about how much her life had changed in the span of a few months. She had come to Alaska expecting to die, but instead, she had found a life worth living. She had found love and purpose and a home in the wilderness with a man who saw past her illness to the woman beneath. But she was not naive enough to believe the consumption was cured. She knew better than that. There were still bad days when the coughing returned with a vengeance, when blood stained her handkerchiefs and every breath was agony. The disease was still there, lurking in her lungs, waiting. But for now she was managing it, living with it rather than dying from it, and that was victory enough. In July, a surprise visitor arrived at the cabin. Nora was kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Yates, who had been chopping wood, dropped his axe and moved to the door, his hand instinctively going to the rifle that hung above the frame. But the rider who emerged from the trees was no threat. It was a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair and native features. She wore a mixture of traditional and Western clothing, and her eyes widened when she saw Yates. Yates Donnelly? Is that really you? Anja? Yates lowered the rifle, his expression one of surprised pleasure. What are you doing here? Looking for you, obviously. The woman dismounted and threw her arms around Yates in an enthusiastic hug. It has been 2 years. I thought perhaps you had died and no one had told us. Not dead, just married. Yates gestured to Nora, who had come to stand in the doorway. Anja, this is my wife, Nora. Nora, this is Anja. Her family helped me when I first came to Alaska. They taught me how to survive in the wilderness. Anja's eyes widened as she took in Nora's appearance. Married? You? I never thought I would see the day. She approached Nora with a warm smile. It is good to meet you, Nora. Any woman who could convince this stubborn man to take a wife must be remarkable indeed. It is lovely to meet you as well, Nora said, liking the other woman immediately. Will you stay for dinner? We would love to hear news from your people. Over dinner, Anja shared stories of her village and the changes that had come with the influx of gold seekers and settlers. She spoke of friends who had married, children who had been born, elders who had passed. Yates listened with interest, asking questions and sharing his own news. So, you are happy then? Anja asked him directly. This marriage is a good thing. The best thing, Yates said, reaching over to take Nora's hand. Nora has made me happier than I've been in 20 years. Anja studied them both with shrewd eyes, and Nora knew the other woman had assessed her condition accurately. But she said nothing about Nora's obvious illness, only smiled and said, Then I'm glad for you both. Life is too short to spend alone when you can share it with someone who makes your heart light. After Anja left the next morning, promising to visit again before winter, Yates was quiet and thoughtful. Nora found him on the porch, staring out at the forest. What is wrong? She asked, settling beside him. Nothing is wrong. I was just thinking about what Anja said, about life being too short. It made me realize how precious our time together is, how much I treasure every moment with you. He turned to face her. I want to give you something, Nora, something to show you how much you mean to me. You have already given me so much. Not this. He disappeared into the cabin and returned with a small wooden box. Inside was a beautiful necklace, a gold chain with a pendant shaped like a wildflower. I made this for you. The gold is from my own findings, and I shaped the flower myself. It is an alpine forget-me-not, the territorial flower of Alaska. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that reminds you that you will not be forgotten, not by this land, and not by me. Nora's hands trembled as she lifted the necklace from the box. It was exquisite, delicate yet sturdy, the petals of the flower so finely detailed she could see the individual veins. Yates, this is beautiful. I had no idea you had such skill. I've had a lot of time to practice. He fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. There, perfect. She touched the pendant, feeling the warmth of the gold. I will treasure this always. Thank you. They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, and Nora felt her heart swell with love for this rough, gentle man who had given her so much more than she had ever thought to receive. As summer faded into autumn, Nora's health remained relatively stable. She had accepted that she would never be truly well, that the consumption would always be part of her life, but she had learned to manage it. She listened to her body, rested when she needed to, and took the medications and teas that Yates prepared for her. Most importantly, she refused to let fear of death keep her from living. She and Yates fell into the rhythm of the seasons. They harvested berries and preserved them for winter. They smoked fish and hung venison to dry. They chopped wood and stacked it against the cabin wall. Nora worked alongside Yates as much as she was able, and on days when her strength failed her, she would sit and watch, offering encouragement and company. One evening in late September, as they prepared for bed, Yates said casually, I have been thinking about building an addition to the cabin. An addition? Why? He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. For a nursery, perhaps, or a guest room. Just more space. Nora's breath caught. Yates, you know I cannot give you children. The doctors were very clear about that. Even if my health improved, the consumption makes pregnancy impossible. I know. He pulled her close. But there are other ways to have children, are there not? Anja told me yesterday that there are orphans in Nome, children whose parents died in mining accidents or from disease. We could adopt if you wanted. Give a home to a child who needs one. The idea caught Nora completely off guard. She had never considered the possibility of motherhood, had mourned its loss as one of many things her illness had stolen from her. But now, presented with this unexpected possibility, she felt hope bloom in her chest. Do you really think we could? She asked. What if my health declines again? What if I cannot care for a child properly? Then we will care for them together, Yates said firmly. I'm not suggesting we do this immediately, but perhaps next spring, when we know you have made it through another winter, we could make inquiries. Think about it, Nora. We have love to give, a home to offer. There are children who need both. She thought about it through the long autumn nights as the days grew shorter and colder. She thought about what it would mean to be a mother, to shape a young life and offer guidance and love. She thought about the child she might have been, the children she had once dreamed of having with Frederick. But most of all, she thought about the possibility of bringing joy and hope into a child's life, of creating a family with Yates. Winter came again, and with it, Nora's health declined as expected. But this winter was different from the last. This winter, she had Yates beside her, and she had hope for the future. Even on the worst days, when the pain was overwhelming and she coughed blood into her handkerchief, she held on to that hope like a lifeline. Yates continued to care for her with unwavering devotion. He read to her when she was too weak to hold a book, carried her to the window so she could see the snow-covered landscape, and held her through the long, dark nights when the coughing kept her awake. His love was a constant, steady thing, as reliable as the sunrise, and Nora drew strength from it. On Christmas Eve, Yates surprised her with gifts. He had carved her a jewelry box from pine, with forget-me-nots etched into the lid. He had knitted her a warm shawl in soft wool he had traded for in Nome, and he had written her a poem, simple and heartfelt, about a man who had been lost in darkness until a woman brought him light. Nora cried as she read the poem, her tears falling onto the paper. I did not know you wrote poetry. I do not usually, but you inspire me. He wiped away her tears gently. Do you like it? I love it. I love you." She kissed him softly. "You have given me so much, Yates. You have made me happier than I ever thought I could be. You have done the same for me." He held her close, and they sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. Spring came again, and with it, new life. Nora had survived another winter, and while she was weaker than she had been the previous spring, she was alive, and that was what mattered. As the snow melted and the world turned green once more, Yates brought up the subject of adoption again. "I made inquiries in Nome," he said one morning over breakfast. "There is a boy, 8 years old. His parents died last winter from influenza. He's been staying with the preacher, but Reverend Thomas says the child needs a permanent home. His name is Samuel." Nora set down her cup carefully. "Tell me about him." "He is quiet, from what I understand. Well-behaved, but sad. He misses his parents terribly. Reverend Thomas thinks he needs stability, a family who will love him and help him heal." Yates paused. "I know this is a big decision. I do not want to pressure you." "I want to meet him," Nora said decisively. "If he needs a home and we can provide one, then I think we should at least meet him and see if it would be a good fit for everyone." They traveled to Nome the following week, Nora riding wrapped in blankets against the still cold spring air. The journey exhausted her, but she was determined to see this through. If they were going to become parents, she wanted to meet this child who might become their son. Reverend Thomas greeted them warmly and brought them to meet Samuel. The boy was small for his age, with dark hair and solemn brown eyes. He watched them warily, clearly uncertain about these strangers who had come to see him. Nora knelt down to his level, despite the pain it caused her knees. "Hello, Samuel. My name is Nora, and this is my husband, Yates. We live in a cabin in the woods, and we were thinking it might be nice to have a young man to share it with. Would you like to hear about it?" Samuel nodded slowly, and Nora began to talk. She told him about the creek where salmon ran in the summer, about the forest full of animals, about the cozy cabin with its warm fire. She told him about the books on the shelves and the games they could play, but most of all, she told him about how they wanted someone to share their life with, someone who would make their little family complete. "Would I have to work very hard?" Samuel asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You would have chores, yes," Yates said, joining Nora on the floor. "But nothing too difficult for a boy your age, fetching water, gathering kindling, helping in the garden, and in return, you would have a home, food to eat, warm clothes, and people who care about you. We would teach you to read and write, to hunt and fish, to survive in the wilderness. We would be your family, Samuel, if you wanted us to be." The boy looked between them, his eyes searching. "My mama used to read to me every night. Would you do that?" "Every single night," Nora promised, her throat tight with emotion. "And I would teach you to read too, so that one day you could read to us. Could I call you Ma and Pa?" "We would be honored if you did," Yates said softly. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and then he nodded. "Okay, I will come live with you." The legal arrangements took several days to complete, and during that time, Nora and Yates spent hours with Samuel, helping him grow comfortable with them. They bought him new clothes, warm boots, and a coat that actually fit. They took him to the general store and let him pick out a toy, and his face when he chose a small carved horse was worth more than gold. The journey back to the cabin was slow, with Samuel riding on the saddle in front of Yates. The boy was quiet, watching everything with wide eyes. When the cabin came into view, he said softly, "It looks like home." "It is home," Nora said. "You're home now, Samuel." Adjusting to life with a child was challenging. Samuel was grieving for his parents, and there were nights when he woke crying, calling for his mother. Nora would go to him, hold him, and rock him, singing the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. Gradually, the nightmares became less frequent, and Samuel began to smile more often. Yates taught the boy to fish and hunt, to track animals and read the weather. Nora taught him his letters and numbers, and read to him every night as promised. They worked together to help Samuel heal from his loss, giving him structure and love and stability. And Samuel, in turn, gave them purpose and joy. His laughter filled the cabin, and his curiosity about the world was infectious. He asked endless questions, explored the forest with enthusiasm, and brought a lightness to their lives that neither Nora nor Yates had anticipated. One evening, about 3 months after Samuel had come to live with them, Nora overheard him talking to Yates as they worked on repairing a fence. "Pa, is Ma going to die?" Nora froze, her hand clutching the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the stew. Yates was quiet for a moment. "We are all going to die someday, Samuel. That is part of being alive. But Ma is sick. I heard her coughing last night, and there was blood on her handkerchief this morning. My first mama coughed like that before she died. Your first mama had influenza, which is different from what Nora has. But yes, Nora is sick, and her illness is serious. She might not live as long as we would like. I do not want her to die." Samuel's voice was thick with unshed tears. "I do not want to lose another mama." "I know, son. Neither do I." Yates set down his tools and pulled the boy into a hug. "But here is what I have learned. We cannot control how long we have with the people we love. All we can control is how we treat them while they are here. We can make sure Nora knows she is loved every single day. We can help her when she is tired, be gentle when she is in pain, and treasure every moment we have together. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Pa, I can do that." Nora quietly returned to her cooking, tears streaming down her face. She had worried about how her illness would affect Samuel, had feared that bringing a child into their home when her health was so uncertain was selfish. But listening to Yates guide the boy through his fears with such wisdom and compassion, she knew they had made the right decision. That night, after Samuel was asleep, she told Yates what she had overheard. "I am glad he knows," Yates said, pulling her close. "I did not want to lie to him. He has already lost too much to false promises and hidden truths." "You handled it perfectly," Nora said. "You are such a good father, Yates. Samuel is lucky to have you." "We are lucky to have him." He kissed her forehead. "He has brought us joy, Nora. He has given us something to focus on beyond your illness. That is a gift." As the months passed, their little family grew stronger. Samuel thrived under their care, growing taller and filling out, his sad eyes regaining their sparkle. He called them Ma and Pa without hesitation now, and the love he showed them was genuine and pure. Nora's health fluctuated, as always. There were good weeks and bad weeks, times when she could participate fully in their daily life and times when she was confined to bed. But through it all, she had Yates and Samuel beside her, supporting her and loving her, and that made all the difference. One autumn afternoon, Nora sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching Samuel and Yates work in the garden. They were harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost, and Samuel was chattering away about something he had seen in the forest. Yates listened with patient attention, occasionally offering comments or asking questions. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing, and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. In that moment, watching her husband and son work together, Nora felt a profound sense of peace. She had come to Alaska expecting to die, but instead, she had found a life beyond her wildest dreams. She had found love and family, purpose and belonging. Yes, her body was failing. Yes, she would probably not live to see Samuel grow to manhood or to celebrate many more anniversaries with Yates. But she had been given something precious, time enough to love and be loved in return. "Ma, look!" Samuel ran up to the porch holding out a perfectly shaped acorn. "Isn't it beautiful?" "It is perfect," Nora agreed, taking the acorn and examining it carefully. "Shall we save it? Perhaps plant it in the spring and watch it grow into a mighty oak?" "Yes," Samuel's face lit up, "and it will be my tree, and it will grow big and strong." "That's a wonderful idea," Nora said, tucking the acorn into her pocket. "We will plant it together." That winter was the hardest yet. The cold settled deep into Nora's lungs, and there were days when she could not get out of bed at all. Yates cared for her with his usual devotion, but she could see the worry in his eyes, the fear that this winter would be her last. Samuel tried to help, bringing her water and sitting beside her bed to tell her stories about his day. In late February, Nora developed a fever that would not break. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her body burning despite the cold air. Yates sat beside her constantly, bathing her face with cool water and forcing tea past her cracked lips. Samuel hovered nearby, his young face drawn with worry. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Nora woke to find herself weak as a kitten, but clear-headed. Yates was asleep in the chair beside the bed, his hand still clutching hers, his face haggard with exhaustion. Samuel was curled up on the floor nearby, wrapped in a blanket. "Yates," she whispered, and his eyes snapped open immediately. "Nora." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against her hand. "Thank God. I thought we had lost you." "Not yet," she managed a weak smile. "I'm too stubborn to die before spring." He laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "You scared me, Nora. You scared us both so badly. I am sorry." She touched his face, feeling the scratch of several days' worth of beard. "But I am still here. I'm still fighting." Samuel woke at the sound of their voices and scrambled to his feet. "Ma, you are awake!" "I am, sweetheart. Come here." She held out her arm, and Samuel carefully climbed onto the bed beside her, snuggling close. "I'm sorry I worried you. Pa said you were very sick. I prayed for you every night." "And your prayers were answered," Nora said, though she knew it had been as much Yates's tireless nursing and her own stubborn will that had brought her through. "I'm getting better now." She did get better, slowly. It took weeks before she could leave the bed for more than a few minutes at a time, and even longer before she could return to her normal activities. But spring came, as it always did, bringing warmth and new life to the frozen land. On the first warm day, when the sun shone bright and the snow was melting into rushing streams, Yates carried Nora outside so she could feel the sunshine on her face. Samuel brought the acorn they had saved, and together, the three of them planted it in a sunny spot near the cabin. "This tree will grow strong and tall," Yates said, his hand resting on Samuel's shoulder. "Just like you, son. And every time we look at it, we will remember this day, remember how we are a family." "Forever and ever," Samuel said solemnly. "Forever and ever," Nora agreed, though she knew her forever would be shorter than theirs. But that was all right. She had made her peace with mortality. What mattered was not how long she lived, but how well she loved, and she had loved these two with everything she had. The years that followed were a gift. Nora survived another year, then another. Her health never improved significantly, but it did not deteriorate as rapidly as the doctors had predicted. She learned to live within her limitations, to pace herself and accept help when she needed it. She learned that life was not measured in the number of breaths you took, but in the moments that took your breath away, and she had plenty of those. She watched Samuel grow from a sad, quiet boy into a confident, happy young man. She saw him learn to read and write, to hunt and trap, to be kind and honest and brave. She taught him everything she could, knowing that one day he would need to navigate the world without her. But more than anything, she showed him what it meant to love and be loved, to belong to a family. She and Yates grew old together, though she aged faster than he did, her body worn down by illness. But their love only deepened with time, becoming something solid and enduring, a foundation upon which their entire life was built. They still read poetry by the firelight, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still kissed each other goodnight as tenderly as newlyweds. On a warm summer evening, 5 years after Nora had first arrived in Alaska, she sat on the porch with Yates and Samuel, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The acorn they had planted had grown into a young sapling, its leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Samuel was now 13 years old, tall and strong, with Yates's steady manner and Nora's quick wit. "Ma, do you remember when you first came here?" Samuel asked. "I was looking through your trunk today and found the advertisement Pa placed for a bride. It said he wanted someone healthy and young." Nora laughed, a sound that still sometimes turned into a cough, but was genuine nonetheless. "I remember. I was neither of those things, and your father could have sent me right back to Nome when he discovered the truth." "Why did you not, Pa?" Samuel asked. Yates looked at Nora, his blue eyes warm with love. "Because I saw past the lies to the truth beneath. I saw a woman who was brave enough to travel to the edge of the world for a chance at happiness. I saw someone who needed love as much as I needed to give it, and I knew even then that she would change my life in ways I could not imagine. And I was right," he continued, taking Nora's hand. "She gave me more than I ever dreamed possible. She gave me love, partnership, purpose. She taught me that strength is not just about physical power, but about the courage to keep fighting even when the odds are against you. And she helped me become the kind of man who could be a good father to you, Samuel." "You both saved me," Samuel said softly. "I was so lost after my parents died. But you gave me a home and a family. You taught me that love is not about blood, but about choice, about choosing to care for each other every single day." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "We saved each other." "Me too," she said. "All three of us. That is what families do." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and Nora felt a deep contentment settle over her. She had lived longer than anyone had expected, had found more happiness than she had thought possible. She had been loved by a good man and had helped raise a wonderful boy. She had built a life in the wilderness that was rich and full, despite, or perhaps because of, its simplicity. 2 more years passed, years filled with ordinary moments that became extraordinary because they were shared. Nora's health continued its slow decline, but she faced it with grace and acceptance. She had long since stopped fearing death. When it came, it would simply be the next adventure, the final journey. On a crisp autumn morning, just after her 41st birthday, Nora woke to find breathing more difficult than usual. She knew with a deep certainty that her time was near. She had felt death approaching for weeks now, had seen it in the increased pain, the constant exhaustion, the way her body seemed to be shutting down piece by piece. "Yates," she said softly, and he woke immediately. "What do you need? More tea? Your medicine?" "No," she smiled at him, memorizing his face one last time. "I need you to listen. I do not have much time left, perhaps days, and I need to say some things while I still can." His face went pale, but he nodded. "I am listening. First, I want you to know that these years with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable, hope when I had given up, and a family when I thought I would die alone. I could not have asked for a better husband, a better partner, a better friend. Thank you for choosing me, Yates. Thank you for seeing me. Nora, please, do not talk like this. You have survived this long. You can survive longer." "No, love, not this time. I can feel it. Death is close now, and I am ready. I am tired, Yates. I have fought for so long, and I am ready to rest." She cupped his face in her thin hand. "But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will keep living. Keep loving. Do not let grief consume you. Take care of Samuel. Help him grow into the man I know he can be. And maybe someday let yourself love again. I do not want you to be alone. I do not want anyone else. I only want you. I know. But life is for the living, and you deserve to have a full life even after I am gone." She paused, gathering her strength. "Can you bring Samuel? I need to talk to him too." Yates nodded, unable to speak, and left to wake their son. When they returned, Samuel took one look at Nora's face and knew. He sat on the edge of the bed, tears already streaming down his cheeks. "Ma," he choked out. "Hush, sweetheart." "It's all right," Nora took his hand. "I'm not afraid, and you should not be either. Death is just part of life, the final chapter in everyone's story. Mine has been a good story, Samuel. You and your father made it good. I do not want you to go. I know. But we do not always get what we want. What we do get is the time we have together, and we have made the most of ours." She squeezed his hand weakly. "I am so proud of you, Samuel. You have grown into such a fine young man, kind and strong and good. Keep growing, keep learning, keep being the wonderful person you are, and take care of your father. He is going to need you in the coming days." "I will, Ma, I promise." "Good boy." She smiled at him through her exhaustion. "And Samuel, thank you for letting me be your mother. It was the greatest honor of my life." The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain and medication, of lucid moments interspersed with long periods of unconsciousness. Reverend Thomas came when Yates sent word, offering prayers and comfort. Anya arrived as well, sitting with Nora and singing songs in her native language, old songs about the journey from this life to the next. On the 4th day, as the sun was setting and painting the cabin in shades of amber and gold, Nora woke one final time. Yates was beside her, holding her hand, and Samuel sat at the foot of the bed. She smiled at them both, these two people who had made her life complete. "I love you," she whispered, "both of you, so very much." "We love you too, Ma," Samuel said through his tears. "Always," Yates added, his voice breaking. "I will love you always, Nora." "I know," She closed her eyes, feeling the pain finally beginning to fade. I know. She took one more breath, then another, and then she was still. The woman who had come to Alaska expecting death had instead found life, love, and family. And in the end, that was more than enough. The years after Nora's death were difficult for Yates and Samuel. The cabin felt empty without her laughter, without the sound of her humming as she worked, without her gentle presence that had made the house a home. They grieved deeply, each in their own way, but they grieved together, and that made the burden lighter. Yates taught Samuel everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness, passing on skills and knowledge that would serve the boy well in life. Samuel, in turn, helped his father heal, giving him purpose and reason to keep going. Together, they honored Nora's memory by living fully, by choosing joy when they could, and by loving each other fiercely. The young tree they had planted grew tall and strong, just as Yates had promised, and sometimes Yates would sit beneath it and talk to Nora as though she could still hear him. He told her about Samuel's achievements, about the changes in Nome, about the beauty of each passing season, and sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines, he would swear he could feel her presence, could almost hear her voice telling him she was proud, that she was at peace. Samuel grew to manhood in that wilderness cabin, strong and capable and kind. When he was 20, he met a young woman in Nome, a teacher who had come north seeking adventure. They fell in love and married, and when Samuel asked if they could live near his father, Yates helped him build a cabin of his own nearby. Eventually, Samuel and his wife gave Yates grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl, and Yates taught them all the same skills he had taught their father. He told them stories about their grandmother Nora, the brave woman who had come to Alaska expecting to die, but instead had taught them all how to live. The years passed, bringing changes to Alaska and to the world beyond. But Yates remained in his cabin in the wilderness, content with his simple life surrounded by family and memories. He lived to be an old man, eventually passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Samuel and his grandchildren nearby. They buried him beside Nora, under the tall tree that had grown from that acorn they had planted together so long ago. On the simple wooden markers, Samuel carved their names in a single line that captured the essence of their story. She was the bride advertised as healthy and young. She was neither, but the mountain man loved her more. And in that love, they had both found something more valuable than gold, more lasting than life itself. They had found home, belonging, and a legacy that would be passed down through generations. Nora Kimball Donnelly had traveled to Alaska to die, but in the end, she had taught everyone who knew her the most important lesson of all, that love transcends illness, age, and even death itself, and that the greatest adventure is opening your heart to another person, flaws and all, and choosing to walk through life together for whatever time you are given. The cabin still stands today, maintained by Samuel's descendants who visit each summer. The tree has grown massive, its branches reaching toward the sky, its roots digging deep into the Alaskan soil. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is just right, people say they can feel the presence of the 2 souls who once loved there, still together, still watching over the wilderness that became their home and the family they built against all odds.